Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Timothy here with Mana Rocks. We are going to continue our Ikoria spoilers for today for the, 2 or 3 people out there who are still watching this. First off, I appreciate you being here. You can go anywhere for the spoilers, including just looking them up yourself. But if you're here watching, I appreciate you being here. Thanks for hanging out. If this makes any sort of difference in your day, if it's informative, entertaining, whatever, feel free to subscribe below or find us on Twitter at MTG_ManaRocks. And I think we know the deal by now. If you're watching part 7 or 8 of whatever this is, then you've probably watched some of the other ones, and you kind of know we just click a card, talk about a card, give its potential limited applications, and then talk about Commander if that seems necessary. Not a lot I can say about Constructed. I don't play a lot of Constructed, so let's go ahead and kick things off. Let's just get right into it with our Boros companion. I believe after this we are waiting on one more companion to get spoiled. I believe the Azorius companion we do not know yet. But anyway, the Boros companion is Zirda, the Dawnwaker. It is a 1 red, white, so 3 mana total for a 3/3 elemental fox. It says the companion restriction, deck building restriction, is each permanent card in your starting deck has an activated ability. So this one's less restrictive than it sounds for Commander because it only counts the permanents in your deck, right? You can play a bunch of permanent cards. You can have instants and sorceries and stuff like that, but only the permanents have to have activated abilities. So this is less restrictive. It doesn't say every card in your deck has to have an activated ability. It just says all of the permanents have to have an activated ability. And clearly this was designed with Cyclone in mind because Cyclone is an activated ability from your hand, but still counts, and that should fulfill the requirement of a Cyclone deck. So this is a companion that I expect to be played quite often in Cyclone decks. Now, this is also close to Lutri territory, the Elemental Otter, because if you're playing a red-white deck that just doesn't have a lot of permanents, you're playing mostly spells, then Zirda can just be your companion, right? As long as the permanents you do have in your deck have activated abilities. And most of the permanents you'll play in a deck that doesn't have a lot of non-creatures and not stuff like that, they play like Mana Rocks and stuff, which almost always, artifacts tend to have activated abilities and stuff like that. So it is a cool deck building restriction. It's less restrictive than it sounds and probably fairly easy to take advantage of. So I expect this one to be pretty popular, especially given the Cyclone deck that we're going to see. And also note your lands, they all have activated abilities for the most part. But you can't play a land that just doesn't have an activated ability. So you wouldn't be able to play, what's a land without an activated ability? Vesuva, something like that, because it doesn't count. But anyway, what this does while it's on board, completely ignore the companion thing. By the way, not happening in Limited. It's basically impossible. Unless every creature in this set has an activated ability, but I don't believe they do. So, not happening in Limited, but 3 mana 3/3. We've seen a bunch of those in this format. That's probably just fine. So you don't have to worry about companion in Limited. But anyway, what you get while this is on board, besides the 3 mana 3/3, is it says abilities you activate that aren't mana abilities cost 2 less to activate, but you can't go below 1 mana, right? So you've got that kind of Training Grounds effect. We saw that on Biomancer's Familiar in Guilds of Ravnica or Ravnica Allegiance, whichever one it was. Very desirable effect to just make all of your abilities cheaper. And this one's kind of neat because I believe both Training Grounds and Biomancer's Familiar only apply to creatures, whereas Zirda applies to all activated abilities. Cyclone being kind of the key thing here. So activated abilities from your hand cost less. Things like ninjutsu and stuff like that would cost less. In red-white, I'm not sure, maybe Blood Rush. There are plenty of abilities you can activate from your hand where Zirda affects those, as well as just the ones from your permanents on board, right? Flashback, for instance, is an activated ability from the graveyard. So it should be pretty neat to have a Zirda deck. I think it'd be pretty cool. And if not, Zirda will definitely fit in a lot of people's decks, mainly this Gavi Cyclone deck that's coming out. Zirda also just has an activated ability itself, which is kind of neat. For 1 mana, you can tap it, and target creature can't block this turn. That's definitely aimed towards Limited, but it's a powerful ability to have, especially on a creature that already has good vanilla stats. So altogether, I like the look and feel of this card. It wants you to push decks that have activated abilities very clearly. I could see maybe there being some constructed deck where this matters a lot, because its effect on board is significant. And if you can match the companion clause, then this is going to match the rest of your deck pretty nicely. So Zirda is definitely a cool card. Expect to see it more than a lot of the other companions when it comes to Commander. Constructed, maybe. Limited, good card to put in the actual deck. Next up, Offspring's Revenge. 2 red, white, black. 5 mana, rare enchantment. So there's an enchantment in each of these color combinations. Each color combination within the set, right? This one says at the beginning of combat on your turn, exile target red, white, or black creature from your graveyard. Create a token that's a copy of that card, except it's a 1/1, and it gains haste until your next turn, right? No haste counters in this set, because apparently haste counters don't make sense when you think about it. But anyway, Offspring's Revenge is kind of cool. So the idea here is you're getting a little 1/1 version of the adult that was killed or something like that, and it's going to seek revenge for the death of its mother or father. Pretty cool design, right? It only affects red, white, and black creatures, which I thought was an interesting thing to do here. Maybe there's some blue or green creature that would just be too good for this effect or something like that, but it's definitely a cool effect. Now, this is geared towards probably limited or constructed. I could see people playing this in Commander, but there are certainly better choices of just, reanimating creatures rather than getting 1/1 versions of creatures. And people who are interested in reanimation in Commander aren't usually interested in exiling their own creatures. So I don't think this will be like an all-star Commander card, but it's definitely an option. As far as limited goes, if you're able to support these colors, this is a really strong effect. Every creature that dies essentially gives you a free 1/1 over the course of the game, and you get to get all those enter the battlefield triggers and stuff like that. And as we've already seen, 1/1s pull their weight in the set just because it gives you something that you can mutate onto. Of course, this requires a couple things. Ideally, you want enter the battlefield effects, and there aren't a lot of those in this set. Second off, you do actually have to get creatures in your graveyard, right? And that sounds like a no-brainer, but cards like this, sometimes they end up failing in limited if your opponent is just pacifism in your creatures or bouncing them and stuff like that, and your creatures aren't actually dying. I don't know that this rare is so powerful that I want to first pick it and then just say, okay, I'm drafting Mardu, but it's certainly the type of card that if I'm already in Mardu, I'm happy to play it. I can't say too much else about it. It's a really tricky kind of card. 1/1 with haste might not matter. It's very funny that it gets haste, but if it has any sort of enter the battlefield triggers or attack triggers or anything like that, it gets a lot better. I guess if I have this card in my limited pool or sealed pool, then I'm looking for attack triggers and enter the battlefield triggers, but I don't know. It doesn't seem super powerful to me, but it's got a cool design to it and probably at the very minimum playable, right? A 1/1 every turn, if you can swing it, is not the worst thing in the world, especially when the 1/1 comes with abilities. You want to bring back like Death Touchers and stuff like that, right? Next up, this is a callback card. It's kind of a joke, really, but it's not a bad card. It's Almighty Brushwagg. And real quick, we'll just click this guy down here in case you don't know what Brushwagg is. Brushwagg is this old creature that said summon Brushwagg on it, but for some reason when they went back and did the, I forget what it was called, but when they went back and kind of changed the types of old creatures, they never got rid of Brushwagg. So that card that we just looked at is the only Brushwagg in Magic. Up till now, they just made another Brushwagg because I guess they could. The card itself is 1 green mana for a 1/1 trampler. So already we have a strictly better charge in Badger because it has an activated ability for 3 and a green. It gets +3/+3 until end of turn. Seems perfectly fine in limited, right? If you're looking to beat down, then sure, this is a fine card. It's a 1-drop that has relevance later in the game. Granted, it's a really expensive mana sink, but when you have that option, it does make it a little bit better, right? I'm not usually a big fan of cards like this, like Baskin Rootwalla and stuff like that, but they do pull their weight and they're fine cards. Where this card is actually kind of cool in Ikoria is that, remember, if you mutate onto this, you have that ability tacked on to the creature you mutated. So assuming you play this on turn 1 and then let's just say on turn 3 you mutate a creature onto this, well, that creature is going to be bigger, right? It's probably going to be a 2/3 or a 3/4 or something like that. So you can attack right away with a 3/4 on turn 3. And then that creature also gains trample plus the ability to pump itself, which is really nice. And we've already seen trample matters in the set for the red-green archetype. So I think the Brushwagg is going to pull its weight. valuable. One drops seem pretty valuable in the set, especially if you have a bunch of mutate creatures, and you could definitely do worse than Brushwagg as a standalone card. If you just play this because it has the ability to become a 4/4, I think it's just okay. But in a deck with a lot of mutate, I think it becomes significantly better. Or if you're in red green with the Trample Matters archetype, it definitely becomes better there as well. Next up, Necropanther. Apparently this was a cycle of like uncommon cats or beasts or whatever. I guess they're different archetypal or color, whatever, you know what I'm getting at. Whitey's cats, there you go. There was a cycle of these, and I think we just rounded out the cycle today. But Necropanther is 1 white and a black for a 3/3, another 3-mana 3/3. There's so many of those in this set. It has mutate for 4 mana. The mutate cost is 2, and then 2 Orzhov mana, so 4 mana total, 2 of which has to be white or black in any combination. And the effect you get here is whenever this creature mutates, return target creature card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. And we've seen a decent amount of that in the Abzan colors already, of just returning creatures straight from the graveyard to the battlefield. This is, I guess, kind of the theme of Abzan, is just getting small things back from the graveyard, incremental advantage, right? Because Sultai seems like it's more morph geared, even though it had like its big legendary mythic Brokos or whatever cares about the graveyard. Sultai seems more like the mutate archetype, whereas Abzan seems more like the graveyard archetype, even though they're going to overlap because they both have those green-black cards. Anyway, Necropanther is a strong card. It has to be a strong card. It's a 3-mana 3/3 with just double upside on it. You know, mutate, even if you're not bringing a creature back, could matter for other mutate triggers. And then, you know, if this had no mutate clause, just having mutate and no other mutate clause, it would still be strictly better than a 3-mana 3/3. So that is an upside to have mutate. And then obviously triggering this and getting back anything relevant is nice. If you can get 2 of these, it's a pretty nice combo, because you can mutate the first one onto something, and then when that mutate creature dies, this Necropanther goes to the graveyard. You can mutate the second Necropanther and get the first one back. So I guess they're not super combo. They don't like infinitely cycle, but it's nice to have multiples. It's uncommon. It's not going to happen too often. Necropanther, clearly a sweet card. This whole cycle, basically all of the mutate cards are cool and powerful. They do open yourself up for 2-for-1s though. Next up, of 1 mind, 2 and a blue for a sorcery. The effect is draw 2 cards. So baseline divination, 3 mana, draw 2, has basically been playable in every set. It wavers whether it's really good in a slow set or if it's a little bit slow in a faster set, right? But divination is always a card that you're happy to play just to have card advantage. Usually almost always play at least 1 copy, and in slower formats you're happy to have multiple copies. This has a cost reduction clause attached to it that says this spell costs 2 less to cast if you control a human creature and a non-human creature. So you have to have 2 creatures on board, one of which must be a human, one of which can be anything but a human, right? And if that clause is fulfilled, this is a single blue mana to draw 2 cards, which is the most powerful effect you're going to get for a single blue mana, right? That's 2/3 of Ancestral Visions or Ancestral Recall or whatever. Very powerful. The fact that this is a baseline divination that is sometimes 1 mana plus a card, like actual straight up card advantage for a single blue mana, is really powerful. It does ask you to build your deck in a way to take advantage of it, but you don't even really need to do that. It's just if you happen to have humans, let's say you've got a turn 3 play and you're deciding between divination and something else, you might wait on casting this card till later in the game because you might just incidentally have a human on board and be able to cast it for cheaper, right? And then on turn 3, you might just throw this out there as a divination and draw 2 cards, so it's fine, right? You don't have to have any of these things in the deck to make this a fine playable card, and then it becomes a fantastic card if you actually fulfill the condition. Very similar to Winged Words from M20, where you could, divination for 2 mana if you had a flyer on board. This asks a little bit more of you, but also makes it a little bit more cheap, right? A little bit cheaper. So, solid card. Again, we're seeing this kind of theme of human matters stuff in basically every color. We'll see a little bit more of that here in a couple seconds, but of 1 mind seems pretty good, as does our next card, Fire Prophecy. A single red, I'm sorry, 1 in a red mana. It is not a single red mana. 1 in a red, instant, common. This is common, so this is going to be your, common Scorching Dragon, Fire, Lightning Strike type card of the set. Your 2 mana, deal 3 damage, but there's a little bit of a rider. So obviously, instant speed, deal 3 damage to target creature. You may put a card from your hand on the bottom of your library if you do draw a card. That's actually a really awesome rider to have to an already playable card. Very rarely do we get just 1 in a red, instant, deal 3 damage to target creature. Does that card even exist? Only hits a creature, not lightning strike, like not hits the creature or player, but just 1 in a red, deal 2 damage to target creature, and that's it. No rider. This type of ability, or this analog card that is in every single set, it always has a rider like exiling a creature or scrying 1 or being able to hit a player instead or something like that. This one has one of the better riders I've seen. Being able to cycle a card away and turn it into an actual real card is really nice, and it's not discard draw, which isn't too far off. If this just said you may discard a card and then draw a card, this would probably essentially be the same thing, but you might save this till later in the game and just use it to cycle away a land into something better. Now, I assume the 2 mana deal 3 instant in this set is going to be good regardless of what kind of set you're in, right? It's almost always hard for a card like this to be bad, but remember, there are going to be a ton of really big creatures floating around, but on the flip side of that, we've also seen a ton of 3 mana 3/3s and things of that nature. So being able to cheaply deal with those while also possibly getting some sort of, advantage, making your hand a little bit better, smoothing out your draw early in the game, finding a land, so on and so forth. Stuff like that is pretty nice. This is also kind of a cool card for Grenzo EDH, right? Grenzo EDH cares about the bottom card of your library, and Fire Prophecy can actually kind of set it up, which is a nice little addition to that deck, even though the effect isn't that big. It's more like kill something you don't care about in order to set up a Grenzo activation. Pretty interesting. Next up, card that I'm going to love. Just FYI, I have an Asperia EDH deck, the original Asperia that can fetch out flyers. And I already play Pride of the Clouds in that deck, so Skycat Sovereign seems like not a strict upgrade, but pretty much an upgrade to Pride of the Clouds. Anyway, for our purposes, Skycat Sovereign is white-blue for a 1/1. It is a rare elemental cat with flying, so 2 mana 1/1 flyers, not cutting it, but it gets +1/+1 for each other creature you control with flying. So with one other flyer on board, this becomes a 2 mana 2/2 flyer, which is pretty reasonable, even though you would have to curve out perfectly for this card to actually be a 2 mana 2/2 flyer on turn 2, right? I don't even know if there is a 1 mana 1/1 flyer in this set, but if there is, you might be able to curve into it, but then you have to play a 1 mana 1/1 flyer, so I don't know. You can also pay 2 white and a blue to create a 1/1 catbird creature token with flying. Catbird. This is Elemental Cat. It makes catbirds for some reason. That's a really good card. So this looks unexciting. If you haven't played with Pride of the Clouds, this card might look unexciting. And if you just kind of look at it in a vacuum, it might seem like, oh, this doesn't deserve to be a rare. It's a 1/1. But this is a very powerful card. First off, it's a mana sink that makes tokens. And that's usually the best you can do with a mana sink. Either, creating something or getting rid of something on board. Some mana sinks pump the creatures. Those aren't as good as something like this that actually makes legitimate threats. 1/1 flyers are legitimate threats, right? On top of that, the Skycat Sovereign gets bigger every time you do that because you're putting more flyers on board. And then you can also just have other flyers on board, right? You don't have to play Skycat Sovereign on turn 2, but if you do, and you follow up with a 3-drop flyer, and then maybe on turn 4 you play another flyer, this is an actual huge threat that your opponent has to deal with, and it can get out of hand. If they can't deal with it, you just, by turn 4, start pumping out more creatures, use your mana on that, and make your opponent deal with this. And if they can't, well, they're going to die. And if they can, they have to use resources on this. You've already made a bunch of tokens. You now get to unlock your hand and start casting spells from your hand. So it's a really good mana sink. Seems like a powerful card. Blue-white. We haven't seen a lot of the uncommons or anything like that really make the cycle tick, or at least make the flying deck tick, but it's flyers, right? you don't really need a lot of work to make flyers good. They're already naturally good. So Skycat Sovereign seems like a very powerful card to me, even though for the uninitiated, it might not seem that great. Ooh, I see a new card up there. I also believe I saw Foxbird. Anyway, not there yet. Let's talk about Flame Spill, because this is an uncard. Yep. Here we go. Let's actually click the uncard real quick in case you don't know. Super Duper Death Ray was this unstable card that it was 3 mana to deal 4 damage to target creature, but the instant had trample. And that was pretty intuitive, right? People understood what that means. That means if I deal 4 damage to a creature with 2 toughness, it tramples over and deals 2 to the opponent as well. And even though black border rules don't really allow for trample to be on instants and sorceries, people understand what that means, right? So I imagine when people are casting Flame Spill, they're going to say, oh, I trample over for this damage, right? But anyway, the card, for those of you who don't actually know it yet, it's 2 in a red, uncommon instant. It deals 4 damage to target creature, already sold, 3 mana instant, bombard, right? Deal 4 to a creature. That's already a solid card. And then it has this new kind of terminology. It says excess damage is dealt to that creature's controller instead. And I don't need to sit here and lecture on what excess damage deals means, but it's basically trample, right? This spell has trample. So if you are killing your opponent's 1/1 with your 3 mana spell, which always feels kind of bad, you do get to carry over the excess damage to your opponent and deal 3 to them as well. So you're going to deal 4 no matter what. You're not going to waste any damage on this card, which I kind of like, right? And that means it's not as feel bad to kill something that's really small with this. Plus, it deals enough damage that you're often just going to kill your opponent's 3/3 or 4/4 and just get a point of damage in sometimes, and that probably feels nice too. So, good removal spell. Also opens up the door for some really interesting designs moving forward. I expect to see that excess damage thing as we move forward, since it's new terminology that they're playing around with. And, you know, it's cool design. We wanted to see something like that for a while, and there you go. Next up, we have our Jeskai enchantment. It is Whirlwind of Thought. It's Narset doing her thing, I guess. It's 1 blue, red, white. So 4 mana for an enchantment, and it's pretty simple text. It says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, draw a card. In Limited, you have to have a very specific kind of deck to make this sort of thing work. Unfortunately, I don't know if that deck's going to come together or not. Like, how many non-creature spells are you actually casting in the course of a game? If your deck's built to do it, go for it, right? But the Jeskai colors care more about Cyclone than actually casting their spells, which is interesting. The more Cyclone you do, the less spells you actually end up casting in a game, because a lot of time you cycle away actual spells and you end up drawing lands a decent number of times, which is interesting. By the way, have we seen a cycle of lands in this set? I feel like we're supposed to get one, given that this is a 3-color set. But anyway, I'm sure they're saving that for last or something. But anyway, Whirlwind of Thought. You know if you want this card or not. If you're in a Jeskai deck and you plan on actually casting a lot of your spells, this is really good, right? If you just have tons of removal and all your removals draw you into extra cards, you're going to outvalue your opponent. Same with all of these enchantments that we've seen that just, you know, draw you a bunch of extra stuff. There's a lot of ways to draw extra cards in this set, but they're all like build around enchantments and stuff like that. If you can build around this one, it's pretty powerful. In Constructed, I can see this being a thing, especially since they kind of like combo off each other. But you do need a pretty tight control deck, and you still need your spells to do something, right? You're not just casting like gain life spells and stuff like that to trigger your Whirlwind of Thought, right? So you know when you want this in Limited. This is going to be a commander card for sure. I think people will be excited to play this in decks that are heavy on spells, because it just lets all of your spells cantrip. We saw something really similar to this. I don't remember what card it was, but there was another one that just turned all of your spells into cantrips, right? I think it might have been the Teamer one, but that made you discard your hand or something like that. Anyway, next up we have Regal Leosaur, red-white, for a 2/2 uncommon dinosaur cat. So that same kind of uncommon cycle of mutate creatures. Hybrid mutate creatures, I guess. Mutate cost is 1 Boros, so 3 mana total to mutate this, and it says whenever this creature mutates, other creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. Okay, we were looking for this effect. A couple videos ago, I said, hey, there's a couple token makers here, there's not a lot. but the deck really needs like a go wide pump spell to become a full on token deck, and I guess Regal Leosaur is what we're getting for that. It's a little awkward and finicky because it's not just a pump spell, it's a mutate spell. And remember, this is a little awkward too because the go wide deck seems like it's human based and you can't mutate onto humans, so you have to find another way to trigger this mutate, whether it's mutating onto it or whatever. But yeah, Regal Leosaur is a go wide pump spell, and it's still a 2-mana 2/2. If you're playing red-white, you're happy to play 2/2s, and this is a 2/2 with upside that has late-game relevance as well. So you can do much worse than, a vanilla 2/2 that might turn into an actual real threat later on in the game. Never pumps itself, by the way. It only pumps other creatures +2/+1, so keep that in mind when you're going for your big attack. And it is kind of like a sorcery speed pump, right? These effects are usually better at instant speed because you can let your opponent do blocks and then blow them out with it. When you do it at sorcery speed, they get to make better blocks, which sometimes they don't have good blocks in the face of a go wide board pump. Anyway, moving right along, we have Slitherwisp. Fun to say. This is blue, black, black. Pretty hard mana cost there, especially if this ends up really being a 3-color set. Blue, black, black for an Elemental Nightmare. It's a 3/2 with Flash. So 3 mana, 3/2 Flash. Perfectly fine card. We've seen a couple of those in recent sets, like those Assassins and the Whisper Sneak or whatever that card was called from Guilds of Ravnica. Perfectly reasonable. We want a little bit more than that, right? 3 mana, 3/2 is not super exciting. Giving it Flash makes it a little bit better. It makes it more of like a combat trick or a removal spell than an actual creature, but it is still a creature. And it says, whenever you cast another spell with Flash, draw a card and each opponent loses 1 life. This is a rare, by the way. Thankfully, this is basically confirming that the blue-black deck is the Flash deck, which we kind of got a hint of because there's an uncommon in the set that makes your Flash cards cheaper. But it didn't feel like it fit in with the other ones because the other ones were really keyword based, which I thought was interesting. Combat keywords and stuff like that. Like the Mentors, there was one for Vigilance, one for Trample, and then Black just randomly got one for Lifelink, but it didn't feel like Lifelink was really a theme of the set or anything like that. It just felt out of place. And I guess there's no such thing as Flash counters, so the Flash archetype is being supplemented with lifelink stuff or something like that, or maybe I'm just missing something here. You can fill me in, but anyway, Slitherwisp is a very powerful card. You do need other Flash spells to make it really worth it, right? This restrictive mana cost just for a 3/2 Flash is not really cutting it, especially since you're not often going to cast it on turn 3. I don't know that you first picked this card yet or not. I don't know how many Flash cards there really are. I can only think of one at common, right? This isn't whenever you cast an instant. It specifically has to be a card with Flash. And the only common I can think of is that Shark Beast that bounces something when it mutates. So unless we see a ton of other really good Flash cards, I don't know if Slitherwisp is really going to be, live up to its build-around potential here. But it is very powerful. It's got Constructed written all over it. And the Flash deck is a real thing. I just don't know how it's going to come together in Limited yet. Next up, we have Snare Tactician. It is 2 and a white for a 2/3 human soldier. Reasonable stats. 3 mana 2/3 seems a little small in a world full of 3 mana 3/3s. But it says whenever you cycle a card, tap target creature an opponent controls. And that's actually pretty powerful. Keep in mind, the Cyclone decks are going to get 2 points in some games, or they can cycle multiple cards per turn, which means that this can be a tapper for basically free. Free in the sense that you don't have to pay to activate this ability, not free in the sense that you probably had to pay in order to cycle your cards, right? But being able to cycle offensively and defensively is really nice. So I can see a deck forming where you want to play like your 2-drop that deals a damage to your opponent whenever you cycle, and then you want to get your enchantment down that gets like 8 counters and makes Krakens, and then you want to use your Snare Tactician as the card that's going to keep your opponent off your back while you're setting up your own engine. So this is a really cool card. It's a human, which matters for the black-white archetype, and altogether, it's a pretty decent payoff for a Cyclone deck. Also a card you can play in an aggressive deck that actually just happens to have a couple Cyclors, right? The stats aren't so bad that you need to worry about not having a Cyclone card to make this, reasonable. It can hold its own in combat, but then you give Cyclone cards, this extra little tap clause attached to them, and that makes for a pretty good defensive card. Maybe not a sustainable long-term strategy, but it is a good offensive strategy. If you can cycle away some of your dorky cards and get blockers out of the way, you can really beat down with a card like this. So this is a repeated tapper. Repeated tappers tend to be pretty good. Almost reads like an uncommon to me, but common's pretty strong. Next up, Immaculate Ultimatum. So our Jeskai Ultimatum, blue, red, white. So again, prominent color here is red, but you also need 2 of each of the other colors. Not very splashable. Unless you're me, you're going to make it work, right? Sorcery, target player gains 5 life. Immaculate Ultimatum deals 5 damage to any target. Draw 5 cards. Okay, so in most games, once you get to this point, this is going to be gain 5 life, and I like having that attached just because you're probably going to take some damage if this is your game plan. If you're trying to get to the point where you can cast an Immaculate Ultimatum, it's not going to happen on turn 7 very often because of that mana cost. So you might be looking at turn 8, 9, potentially 10 to cast a card like this, and life gain helps on big splashy spells because it kind of makes up for some of the damage you took up to that point. It also, is going to kill your opponent's, hopefully, best creature. 5 damage won't actually kill everything in the set, but it'll kill enough. It can also go to your opponent's dome. So, if this kills your opponent because they're at 4 or 5 life, then the rest of the text doesn't really matter. So it's got Lava Axe attached to it, but mostly creature removal. And then you draw 5 cards is obviously the sweet point here. So the combination of effects is really powerful. You basically draw a whole new hand, kill a creature, gain a little bit of life, and that life means that you're probably going to survive until your next turn to be able to cast those 5 cards. So, very powerful. This isn't as splashy or as crazy of an effect as the other ultimatums, right? Destroy all your opponent's non-land permanents, or reanimate every creature in my graveyard, or cast 2 of the best spells in my deck. Those are really splashy, kind of off-the-wall effects. This one's more tame, more grokkable. It's just like generic abilities with the number 5 attached to them, but the combination of abilities and the card advantage you get off of this is pretty strong. This is what, a 6 for 1? Kill a creature, draw 5 cards. That's 6 cards for 1 card, and you gain a little bit of life. Can't ask for too much better than a 6 for 1 limited, but again, you have to be these 3 colors to make it work. This is probably going to see constructed play. Fires of Invention, still a card, and it tends to be the Jeskai deck, right? To be fair, any of them can see play in Fires of Invention. This is just actually castable in that deck. Couple more here. We've got, in my opinion, the best Cyclone payoff to date. This is the card you want if you're playing a Cyclone deck. It's the best effect you can get for just Cyclone cards. It is Unpredictable Cyclone. 3 red for an enchantment. And I'm just going to summarize this. If you cycle a card and that causes you to draw a card, instead of drawing a card, you flip cards from your library until you hit a card that shares a type with whatever you cycled, and then you cast that for free without paying its mana cost. The rest of the cards go to the bottom, and this itself has Cyclone for 2 mana, although it does specify another non-land card, so this won't trigger if you actually cycle the Cyclone itself. It also says non-land card, so you can't cycle like a desert or something like that and then flip a land, but basically, in layman's terms, if you cycle a sorcery, you're going to cast the next sorcery that pops up in your deck. If you cycle a creature, you get to free cast the next creature in your deck, which, just think about that, commander aside, constructed aside, just think about that in limited. Your Cyclone cards are normally really cheap cost attached to really big, strong permanents. Think the uncommon cycle of creatures that are like 8/8s and 7/7s and 6/4s with First Strike and Tramplers and stuff like that. This means if you cycle away a creature that has 1 mana Cyclone, 1 mana to cycle that creature away, and you flip a 11/11 Trample off the top, you just cast that card for free, which is insane. You get to turn like your 1 mana into 12 mana spells, or I'm exaggerating, not 12 mana spells, but not too far off, right? your 2-mana Cyclone card, you cycle away some sorcery you don't really care about, and you get to free cast the next sorcery. Now, you don't have control over what you're going to hit here, but the sweet spot here is creatures, right? If you cycle away a creature early in the game, maybe not super early because this is a 5-mana enchantment, but on turn 6 you start cycling away 2 or 3 really cheap creatures, and you just slam these big creatures into play. Of course, you might also hit dorky creatures off the top because you are obviously playing those cards in your Cyclone deck, but wow, and that's just limited, so this is a little volatile. Clearly the name is an unpredictable Cyclone, a little bit on the nose, and you can't really plan around what's going to happen when it comes to limited, but it's still very powerful. And in Commander, this is just the best effect you get for cycling cards, right? The other cards are kind of like sit there and waste my opponent's time with Astral Slides and Faith of Devoteds. Drakehaven's pretty decent, but you don't get a huge advantage off of those. You get incremental advantage over cycling a bunch of cards. This gives you the potential to just get a huge advantage off of every single cycling card, which to me is just crazy. So I expect this to be basically the pinnacle of Cyclone decks moving forward. This is the card you want. You know, it reminds me of like New Perspectives. It's big, flashy Cyclone Matters card. And this plus New Perspectives is just nasty. Like, cycle cards for free. And you still get to draw the card. Or you don't get to draw the card. You don't get to draw the card. It's a replacement effect. So your Cyclone cards turn into free spells, but they don't turn into new cards as well. Anyway, let's go and move on. Winota, Joiner of Forces. So I didn't realize until today that there's a cycle of mythic humans. There's 5 mythic rare humans that all match the 2 color pairs, the allied colors. Or I'm sorry, these are enemy colors. So like red, white, black, green. We'll see the blue-green one right after this. But Winota is very powerful. Let's just put it that way. 2 red, white for a 4/4 mythic human warrior. And it says whenever a non-human creature you control attacks, you look at the top 6 cards of your library, put a human from among them onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. It gains indestructible and the rest go to the bottom. So a couple things going on here. First off, this is a human payoff that needs you to have non-human creatures, which we've seen a decent number of those at this point. So it's a little bit balanced by the fact that you kind of want this half-half split, right? If you have too many non-human creatures, when they attack, you're going to look at cards and you're not going to see that many humans because you just don't have that many in the deck. On the flip side, if you have too many humans, then you don't have ways to actually trigger this ability. I think you want to err on the side of having more humans and a couple non-humans here and there, because every time those non-humans attack, you want to get an advantage off of them and turn those into humans. So making sure you have actual targets when those creatures attack is what you want to do. Whereas the other way around, if you have too many non-humans, you're just going to brick very often. Now, that being said, for some reason, this card triggers off every non-human attack in it. It doesn't say whenever 1 or more non-human creatures attack, do this. No, you do it for every single non-human that attacks. So if you have 2 non-humans attacking and you have Winota on board, you get to look at 12 cards, which is half of your limited deck almost. You can just plow through your entire limited deck here, looking at 6 cards a time, and hopefully you have enough humans to hit. You know, you're going to brick every now and then, but the creature comes in attacking, it gains indestructible, so you're going to get to keep that creature. Probably going to deal some extra damage. This card seems incredible, but also, given how powerful it is, it seems really balanced by the fact that you need to kind of split the dividends and make sure you have equal number of humans that this can fetch and an equal number of non-humans that this can actually trigger itself. You know, on its own, this card is just a 4-mana 4/4 because it doesn't trigger its own ability. It is a human. So on its own, this is just a good vanilla creature. It needs actual other non-humans and humans in order to become busted. So while this has the potential to just be an absolutely insane card, I do see limited decks where you attack with a couple creatures and you just brick, right? So not like, it is kind of an insane effect just because 6 cards is so many, and maybe there's some limited, or not limited, but constructed deck where this is super busted, or, you know, I could see this being at the forefront of a commander deck that cares about humans but also has a lot of non-humans, stuff like that. Seems like a really powerful card to me. Standalone 4-mana 4/4 is fine in limited, not in constructed. Next up, Kinnan, Bonder Prodigy. So this is our Simic human legendary. This one is a 2/2 for blue-green, so 2 mana 2/2. It says whenever you tap a non-land permanent for mana, add 1 mana of any type that permanent produced. So it's a mana doubler, but only for non-lands. So it makes your mana rocks or your creatures tap for additional mana, but your lands don't actually tap for more. Clearly, though, if you go like turn 1 Land War Elf, turn 2 play this thing, your Land War Elf now taps for 2 mana. And in Commander, like all of your mana rocks, all your signets, all of your talismans, your soul rings, they all tap for an additional mana, plus your creatures too, right? So it's a mana doubler for non-lands, which is kind of a neat little twist. It also says 5 green blue. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may put a non-human creature card from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. So this is actually similar design space to Urza, which was an extremely and is an extremely busted and unfair Magic card. Kinnan's very similar, right? Whereas Urza gives you a bunch of mana off your artifacts that then turns into free cards, Kinnan gives you a bunch of extra mana off of basically all your non-land mana sources, and then has an activated ability that gives you free cards, which is really nice. If you want ramp and you just happen to have a bunch of ways that produce mana off of, non-land permanents, Kinnan is going to be a busted card. It has the potential to just generate a ton of extra mana in the right kind of deck for Commander, but also Constructed. This is the type of card I can see in Constructed with a bunch of mana dorks and mana rocks and stuff like that. And here at Mana Rocks, we're a big fan of Mana Rocks. So Kinnan, welcome aboard. I'm not in love with designs like this where it's, generate a bunch of mana and then also sink your mana into something, but I don't like when a single card just does everything by itself, I guess is what I'm saying. But Kinnan doesn't, right? Kinnan really doesn't do everything by itself. It does need you to have a little bit of a deck building constraint of having permanents that tap for mana but aren't lands, right? So Kinnan is balanced out by the fact that it doesn't affect lands. And then what do we have here? Vulpikeet. It's a vulpine parakeet, a fox bird, quite literally a fox bird. Okay, Vulpikeet, sure. 3 and a white for a 2/3 flyer. Respectable stats. That stat line on a flyer is always like just there in limited. It's not quite, pushing the envelope or anything like that, but a 4 mana 2/3 flyer is fine. It says whenever this creature mutates, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Okay, that's pretty strong. The mutate cost is 2 and a white, also pretty good. This is the type of thing I'm talking about with these cheap mutate creatures, where if you have that Brushwagg on turn 1, or literally any 1-drop or 2-drop creature, and then you go turn 3 mutate, you suddenly have this like really big flyer your opponent has to deal with. And remember, if you already had the creature you mutate onto on board since the beginning of the turn, it doesn't like regain summon and sickness. So you just attack with a 3/4 flyer right away on turn 3, and then if you keep mutating onto it, it just gets bigger. Your opponent has to deal with it. So I do really hope that there's some more really efficient removal in this set. They don't want people to get punished for mutating, but you also don't want people to just lose to like a turn 3 mutate creature followed up by another mutation on that creature, because you're just gonna get buried by that if you can't keep up with it. This is a very powerful effect if you curve into it, and if you can follow up with another mutate card, you might be dead in just a couple turns, right? So I'm hoping that the batch of spoilers we get tomorrow reveals a little bit more removal, cheap, efficient removal. We've seen a little bit in this set, but not like a ton that makes me comfortable with how good some of these mutate cards are. Anyway, let's just double check, as always, make sure there's no more spoilers. So we're going to go ahead and call it there. There's nothing else on Mythic spoiler. Remember, we got the rest of the set to look forward to tomorrow, and as of right now, it looks like we've got about 100 cards, including basic lands, left. So we're going to have a lot to talk about tomorrow. We'll probably split that into 2 cards, and we'll try to gloss through most of the kind of filler cards that we don't have too much to say about, right? We don't need to talk about every combat trick and every vanilla creature in the set, so we'll try to go through those at a quick pace. But anyway, as always, thanks for watching. I hope this has been useful for you to kind of get an idea of some of the Ikoria cards. We'll wrap up tomorrow. Thanks for being here. My name is Timothy with Mana Rocks. I'll catch you next time.